Hello and welcome. My name is Emily Prieto, and I'm the co-host of the Seeds of Tao podcast alongside my husband, Joshua Prieto. We're also the co-owners of the Seeds of Tao education platform and incubator for regenerative entrepreneurs. If you're new to the podcast, this is a podcast for impact entrepreneurs creating regenerative enterprises. We often get asked what exactly a regenerative enterprise or impact entrepreneur is. So if you're wondering, a regenerative enterprise builds triple bottom line profits through the practice of ethics and principles that lead to a more inclusive, fair, and balanced economy. Impact entrepreneurs, or regenpreneurs, as we sometimes like to call them, are those willing and able to take on the financial and personal risks of starting and building regenerative enterprises. You'll get to know exactly what all that means as you join us for this and future episodes, but know that we welcome everyone to join us as we work to build regenerative economies together. That's exactly why we are here doing what we do at Seeds of Tao. Our mission is to help establish regenerative economies in every bioregion by serving individual regenpreneurs like yourself. In this podcast, you'll hear the startup stories in all their glory from impact entrepreneurs all over the globe. You'll learn and grow the skills of building a regenerative enterprise from your peers, mentors, and leaders. Finally, we'll get to know each other as you engage in the podcast and join the wonderful Regenerative Business Economies Network, aka RegenBen, an open community where peers, colleagues, funders, allies, and supporters of regenpreneurs come together to build and the regenerative economies of the future. Join us every month for a wonderful episode as we collectively move beyond sustainability and into our regenerative future. It all starts now.
Welcome to the Seeds of Tao podcast. I have a good friend on the air with us today, Ben Kimura-Gross. And I wanted to say your last name with its proper accents and spellings. I can't do the R's like you can. So maybe you can share that with us because I love different names and backgrounds. But Ben, how are you today?
Very well, thanks. And thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Good. So Ben, we always start off our podcast, and I know we're at different times of the day because we're on other sides of the world, but I start off with the first question of what got you up this morning? What gets you excited to do the work that you do? So kind of give us a little bit of what your day looks like.
Okay. Well, what got me up this morning was our little puppy. And I'm always the one who takes her out in the morning.
Uh-huh.
First round, maybe the second one too. And what gets me up though, in terms of the work that I do, is that about 18 months ago, I switched away from working for corporates and the government towards working for policy advocates in the sustainability sector and green tech startups. And this morning I had a session with a guy who helps me with marketing. That was part of my day. Then I am collaborating with a learning platform called Wonder. Had a session with them, to build out a course. Wonderful. And in the afternoon, I went to a startup that's just outside of Berlin, actually, and did some training there. Yeah.
Very cool.
So that's a pretty rounded off day for me. I like it a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's like entrepreneurs, we get to do, not every day is the same. We can get into some areas of our journey that can be a little bit more mundane depending on where we're at. But a lot of times we're all over the place, right? We get to do all sorts of different things. So this morning, waking up to marketing conversation and then kind of working through building a course. So you have a little bit of product development there, a little bit of how we get our message out, how you're messaging. So tell us a little bit more before we get into your story. Tell us a little bit more about your the work that you're doing, and then we want to figure out how you got to doing this work that you're at currently.
Okay. So currently the work that I'm doing revolves around doing negotiation trainings for specifically two groups of people. One is green tech startups, and plus anybody in the regenerative field, anybody working on regenerative business concepts and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the other side is policy advocates, usually on the mainly in Europe. So EU Commission, that kind of stuff. Working for policy advocates that work for NGOs and trying to influence policies at the national level or EU level. Yeah.
That's so needed. All of that, right? And so, how did you? Let's maybe go into storytelling mode. Like, how did this come to be? Like, what got you started on this specific journey, helping people with policy, helping regenerative business owners and communities to really move these efforts forward?
So this friend of mine, right? I've said his name so often in interviews, he probably hates me by now, but hey,
yeah,
who cares, right? So Gavin runs an international organization or an association for green tech, basically, producers and providers of green technologies in the shipping industry. And about 18 months ago, I started having some conversations with him about, where he sees the hurdles, what he thinks is important, that what kind of skill sets the people in his association need. And we came on this topic of, that it's not just sales, it's also, with the smaller companies, conversations with investors, or also negotiations with existing clients, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of negotiation and conflict resolution in any kind of field that tries to innovate.
Right.
And that's what a lot of people in the sustainable and regenerative field are trying to do. They're trying to innovate. And I remember we also talked about the valley of death. In the process of innovation, there's that moment where you've started to produce and now you've got expenses, but you don't have enough income yet, and it kills your cash flow, and there you go. Right? Or product adaptation isn't happening at the speed that you expected it to. So lots of, concerns about innovators basically dying off in this thing called the valley of death.
Right.
I don't have a statistic to hand, like how many startups make it through that, or how many innovators, because it's not always startups that are the innovators, right? Sometimes the innovation is going on in an R&D department of a company or something like that. But probably 99 out of 100 don't make it through the valley of death.
Right.
So what are the problems? Why don't they? And then we started talking about that, and we came upon that a lot of issues revolve around communication skills, negotiation skills, getting the right kinds of contracts. For example, making sure that once you've signed a contract that you're, you've got a legally enforceable payment schedule. Simple things like that. You delivered your goods, and your customer says, we'll pay you in 90 days. And you say, no, we don't have 90 days to wait. That's going to kill us. It says 14 days on our invoice, doesn't it? And they say, yeah, we don't care. It's our corporate standard. Thank you very much. Yeah. So we were talking about those kinds of issues. And at the time, I was still mainly focusing on training corporate leaders and government employees. And he said, Ben, you know what? Really, what you should be doing is drop what you're doing and help in the field of sustainable and regenerative startups. Yeah.
So why would he say that? Because you were in your own career at this point, right? And maybe
I know, but I was in a career supporting, let's say, one of the biggest German news media corporations, and buying paper by the ton for the newspapers.
Right.
So it's really simple negotiations on that side, right? Actually, if you think about it, you got the quality of the paper, how much does it cost per ton, what are the delivery schedules and things like that. So there it's really, well, it came to a crunch about 18 months, around the time when I actually quit them. Around the time when I quit my corporate clients, or maybe a little half a year before that or something, they actually had some crunch time, which also had to do with sustainability issues, which is that wood and paper became hugely expensive suddenly. My parents at the same time wanted to install a shed, and the wood they purchased would have cost them twice as much if they had purchased it 2 months later.
Wow.
Well, that's, on a corporate level and on a personal level, I was experiencing, maybe also that influenced me subconsciously, like, okay, wait, something's happening here. And then Gavin, who I've known for almost 20 years now, I don't know, 15, 16 years. So Gavin came along with a big morality club. And he smacked me hard. I'm not, he's a really, really great guy. And because we've got a good friendship with a lot of trust, he can be very direct in his criticisms of, for example, where are you taking your career, Ben? Right? And I don't know, I just started looking into what's happening in the sustainability sector. I started seeing the urgency that I hadn't really understood before. I'd understood that something needs to happen, but I hadn't understood the urgency in terms of like, we got 3 years to do this, 5 years to go do this, 8 years to do that, and then that's it. Then it's done with choices. Then we've decided on what path we're going to go down as industries, as humanity.
Right. Negotiation gets really simple at that point, right?
No. Sadly, it doesn't, because physical realities aren't perceived by everyone in the same way. So you can tell somebody, you're driving your car towards a cliff at 200 miles an hour, and you need to, right now, do two things. Put your foot on the brake and tear the steering wheel around and just run off onto that field to the right-hand side. And then maybe you won't go off the cliff. And the guy who's sitting in the car comfortably, because it's a great SUV and it's a wonderful ride, and he's got the radio going and everything's fun and right? And he's having a great time. And first of all, he's saying, I can't see past the edge of the cliff. Maybe it's not a cliff. I don't know. And the other thing he's saying is, honestly, if I drive the car onto the field, it's going to break an axle. Who's going to pay for that?
You're totally right. And I don't, you think at this point we would actually figure out that this is something that we have to put our efforts into. Climate change, biodiversity challenges, all of these, and for a lot of us, it is really clear. And then others, their perception of what's going on around them is completely different. So you're right. It does probably even take more negotiation at that point to be able to help people get, or more drastic negotiation, I should say, to be able to steer us towards a safer outcome.
In my terms, when you say more drastic negotiation, I would call it negotiating that more uncompromisingly steers towards strategic goals. Have strategic goals. We've been compromising on reaching them. And if we want to get through the crises that we're heading for in one piece, or without strong upheavals in our societies and the societal structures we have, and the supply chain resilience and all those things, if we don't want those things, I'm not a doomist or anything, okay? So I'm not saying it's all going to fall apart, but this is not me, right? The reinsurers, so the companies that insure the insurance companies, the people who have the best power of prediction, they're saying that there will be a lot of upheaval, in everything from food supply, food systems, supply chains for all kinds of products that are produced by international supply chains. So upheaval doesn't mean breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
But it's always a question, right? What level of upheaval are we willing to withstand? And even now, we can say that the likelihood that millions will die is very, very high.
Right.
So, do you want it to be an upheaval where, like those predictions, 700 million people from the northern parts of several countries in northern Africa have to leave their countries in order to be able to survive? 700 million, that's a pretty big upheaval. That's like going on to almost twice the number of people living in Europe.
Right.
And so when I understood all those things, and Gavin had, poked me enough, basically I said, okay, new clientele, right? Give up the corporates and give up most of the government work, and focus on really these clients, which are innovators that are trying to move the needle in the right direction, being green tech startup founders and anybody working in the sustainability, regenerative and circular field, and policy advocates.
And so was it how I'm curious, because it sounds like you did your due diligence and you did your research after being poked by Gavin and having these conversations with him. What kind of period was that? And maybe it seems like, just kind of coming from that lens that you shared just a moment ago of the two drivers, the driver and the passenger. Maybe Gavin was in a driver's seat and kind of seeing the cliff more clearly, but you had to be someone that was at least aware of things going on. So was it just more of like, I had this huge epiphany and I did the research and spent the time to do that research? What kind of time period are you looking at here, and what was your process as you were diving into understanding the challenges that we're facing right now and how you might be able to help?
So I did already have quite a few connections in that field because I've always been interested in it. And I can't remember exactly when, but 2008 or 9, I actually joined and co-founded an NGO called the Green Heart Project, which was about wind shipping, meaning so shipping between the Pacific Islands, smaller Pacific Islands, uses, just regular diesel container ships or other kinds of small bulk ships. And well, they pay a lot for the diesel because, diesel becomes more expensive as it becomes more inconvenient to transport it where it's needed. And the ships were pretty old, so it was kind of an idea to say, like, hey, why don't we create a vessel, for the start, a small prototype vessel. So for the start, a small prototype vessel that just has a sailing rig and solar panels on top and just does it all without diesel.
That's cool. Yeah.
It's possible to do that. You very, very quickly run into size problems. You run into problems like electrical charging stations at ports and all that kind of stuff. So we were it was too early. It's doable. And I think some of this might actually happen now. Around Europe, we're talking about lots of just purely electric ferries. They're not even solar. I mean, they got solar panels, but they don't run off that. They run off batteries and they go back and forth for limited distances. And so But basically, to bring it back to answer your question, right? I'm going off on a tangent here. It was an exciting time, and it was an exciting project. We almost got money from Europe too for that, but then they said, "Well, it's in the Pacific; it's not really a European project." So, yeah. And so I was already connected with people who were active in that field, and then I started reaching out to them. Started reaching out to people in Japan, people in India. People in America, and very quickly, just within a few weeks, started hearing the same kind of story, which is, read the IPCC reports. This is what they say. These are the urgencies. These are the deadlines we have to meet. 1.5 degrees is maybe still doable, but only if societies were able to change and innovate at a pace that they're clearly not doing. We'll probably hit 2 degrees. We may hit 2.8 degrees, et cetera, et cetera. And that information for me popped up with very little research, very, very quickly. Then I did read the IPCC reports, and that was shocking. And then I very quickly decided, okay, things have got to change. I mean, things have got to change in the world too, but for me, what I do professionally has to change. Anything else would be irresponsible. So that's then, I just pulled the plug on the old stuff and started diving into the new, started really connecting with a lot of new and really, really fascinating people and projects on LinkedIn, mainly on LinkedIn. That's my main platform that I'm active on to connect with people. I think we connected there too.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I think we originally connected through a friend that I have through the GRC. A marketing friend. You know her well, but anyways, I'm my mind is spacing.
But yeah, basically, it's friend introducing a friend via LinkedIn, and so then what started happening about half a year in, when I was feeling I'm still a learner, I'm going to do some pro bono work. Okay, I've got a bit of a financial buffer, so I'm going to do some pro bono work and just figure out, the ropes. Then, the heat wave hit in India. And by that time, I was connected with people in India who were saying, just like we're having a conversation now, I talk to a lot of people on Zoom. And in a Zoom session, somebody would say, like, it's depressing. I don't want to go outside because, there's dead animals on the street and stuff, just died of heat stroke. And to hear that, and then to be connected with people in Pakistan who, talk about the effect of the floods and how lucky they feel that they're not in an area that's flooded, when 1/3 of the country is flooded. And who say, Ben, honestly, most Europeans I speak to haven't got a clue what this means, 1/3 of Pakistan in terms of size. Do you? And to my own shame, I didn't know the size of Pakistan. And it turns out 1/3 of Pakistan is about 80% of Germany. And then in my mind, I started drawing a line, from Frankfurt, not the southern Frankfurt, but the Frankfurt on the eastern border of Germany, Frankfurt-Oder, to Berlin, to Hamburg, and across, in my mind, I started drawing a line in, okay, which cities would be kind of north of the 80% flooded, and which it's totally irrational, right? Because the mountains are in the south of Germany. So it would be them that's safe and Berlin would be flooded, but never mind that, right? But I imagine, like if I took the northern 20% of Germany and the rest was flooded, how much would be flooded? And formed tried to form a more, gut level understanding of what that means. And that's brought on by always, for me, conversations with people who are there, who are close enough to care, who are close enough to be affected, possibly. And in some cases, close enough to see others being affected. even though they themselves got through it okay.
Right.
And I'm a people person, I think.
I would say that. I'm just noticing the empathetic thoughts that and process that you're going through there as you're making this really big decision that not a lot of people are going to make, because of the comfortableness that it is when you are in a career that's moving you forward and supporting your family, supporting your livelihood, and then you have to have a strong empathic ability to see that, to recognize from a friend that's saying, I really want you to look into this. I really think there's need for what you do in solving this problem, and then to go out and do that research, right? And then filling the impacts, I think is a huge thing that we often don't get ourselves out of our own bubble enough. So you are a people person in a very big sense. And I think if you could help us kind of walk through, and I think it helps us as entrepreneurs in this space, who a lot of times are working with their own buyer region, right? But being able to understand the patterns that you did in that process of seeing it kind of on a global perspective, help us maybe. What were some of those patterns that you saw in those conversations that would help us to grasp the complexity of this, or grasp the ability for us to use a service like negotiation to help us move our own directives forward within our own businesses, but also attach it to kind of this global narrative of change and regenerative change, right? I know that's a huge question. I'm not sure if I worded it.
Yeah, I was about to say, but I'll try and go with this idea of patterns, okay?
Okay, yes.
First question, what's a negotiation?
Uh-huh.
What would you say is a negotiation?
Ooh, putting me on the spot here. So negotiation, a conversation on opposing a conversation between two opposing sides to reach some type of agreed upon or some type of agreement is a negotiation.
Yeah. Okay, I'll give you my definition. Anytime two or more parties want to achieve a shared goal, you've got a negotiation. So sometimes it's a conversation, sometimes it's a back and forth of written messages, sometimes a contract is, most of the time, a contract is part of a negotiation. Mm-hmm. Why achieve a shared goal? Well, because even, let's say two countries engage in a war. If they start negotiating and they're trying to negotiate a peace, that's their goal. They might be fighting each other with weapons and killing people of their own and other countries. Of each other's countries is what I wanted to say. But they do have a shared goal, which is to stop doing that and arrive at a peaceful settlement, right? From my experience, also, what's helpful is, I'll give you an example. So in 1993 or 4, I think it was, in South Africa, Nelson Mandela was the candidate for the presidency in an upcoming election. I think the election was in 1994, if I'm not mistaken. And some white supremacists really didn't think that this was a good idea. They thought, we got to stop this by all means, whatever it costs. And So a group of people turned to a military general, who was a military general of the, South African military. And he basically collected a group of 55,000 militants who were willing to threaten Mandela with civil war. 55,000 armed men and women willing to say, we're going to start a civil war. We're going to start taking our weapons and go out and raid, black villages and basically kill people. Start whether it's a genocide or whatever. But if you're starting a civil war without the other guys saying like, yeah, it's a civil war, then you're basically just slaughtering people.
Right.
Okay, so you got that kind of threat point. It's like having a gun pointed at your head saying, don't be a candidate for the presidency. It's worse than that. What did Mandela do? And this is one of the things that I think is crucial in achieving major successes in very, very difficult negotiations. And I see, a lot of the people, both startups and green tech, that sometimes they face really, really difficult negotiations. Impact startups, sometimes they're trying to argue about the value of sustainability. Investors going like, hey, where's my 10-fold return? Where's my 100-fold return? They're saying, no, but it's about survival. It's like, I don't care. Give me my 20-fold return. So how do you do that? How do you walk into a negotiation where you're not really on the same page to start off with?
Mm-hmm.
So here's what Mandela did. Mandela invited this general called Constant Viljoen. He invited him for tea. He said, come over to my house. I'm sure he said it differently, right? This is my paraphrasing, right?
Right.
But invited him for tea. And he sat him down on a sofa in the living room. So he sits him down on a sofa in the living room, and then he pours him tea, and he sits down next to him, not across the table. So you know what a lot of negotiations look like. You've got a conference room, right? This is not a conference room, it's a living room. You've got a big table, and you sit down on hard chairs on opposite sides. This is not a big table, it's a little coffee table. You're not sitting on hard chairs, you're not sitting on opposite sides. What do all those things do?
It makes you feel closer to that person. It makes you feel like you're in someone's home. You're in private conversation.
Mm-hmm. Makes you feel like you're in a safe space.
Mm-hmm.
And then Mandela had learned Afrikaans, which isn't his mother tongue. And he spoke to the general in Afrikaans. He didn't use a translator or a what do you call that? Simultaneous interpreter.
Mm-hmm.
So not using an interpreter and speaking the language of your counterpart, the mother tongue of your counterpart, is a huge step too. And then he had studied who the general's favorite rugby teams and the favorite players on those teams were. Mm-hmm. And he started talking about them and asking the general questions about these rugby players. So suddenly the general finds himself in a situation where his attitude is, as he's walking in, I'm going to have a hard-nosed ultimatum-style negotiation with a terrorist barbarian. That's what he walked in with. Mm-hmm. And 5 minutes later, this terrorist barbarian is showing the general that actually, I speak your language, I treat you kindly, I'm creating a safe space, and I'm showing you that I respect your culture.
Right.
That's how you get people to change their minds. So you don't expect them to come to you. You go to them first. You make sure you understand where they are on their journey. You make the effort of researching about where they're coming from, what their whatever likes and dislikes are, or hobbies or things like that, right? Because this is not just small talk. This is trust talk. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what was the consequence? The consequence was that Mandela was able to convince Constant Viljoen to lay down his arms, quit his ultimatum, right? No longer go back to his people and say, hey, we're not starting a civil war. This is crazy. The guy is off the roof, relaxed. This is not a terrorist, you know? Okay, off the roof, relaxed doesn't work, but never mind, you know. He's an amazing guy, right? He changed my mind about a lot of things. And in fact, Nelson Mandela also convinced Constable June to go into politics instead. So Constable June gets voted into the new parliament. And when Nelson Mandela resigns at the end of his period during which he governed, Constable June made a goodbye speech to Nelson Mandela. Got up on stage, made a goodbye speech. And here's the amazing thing. In the 5 years in between, he had learned Nelson Mandela's mother tongue, Xhosa.
Wow.
And not completely, probably not perfectly, but enough to hold the public and official goodbye speech in Nelson Mandela's language.
That's beautiful.
And that's a white supremacist. So what fascinates me is, how do we reach deep down into ourselves, overcome the fear that is created when people aggress against us? You know, like say, I've got 50,000 armed people and I'm going to start killing your people. How do we overcome that fear? How to remain confident and calm in spite of the pressure that other people put on us in negotiations, which obviously aren't going to be all about, physical aggression or military aggression, right? That's not where we're at when we're talking about negotiations between startups and, let's say, a big corporate client. But there is pressure. And sometimes they're very manipulative and they're quite threatening sometimes in the way they put pressure on you. We're your first big client. You should be working for us for free because putting our name on your website, that's worth it. All the money you put and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
So, and it happens all the time, right?
Oh, I've been there. There's a young branding agency.
And so how do you remain calm and confident in the face of that kind of aggression or confrontation? Or power play, if that's what you want to call it, right?
Right.
And how do you achieve amazing results in spite of it? That's what fascinates me. And one of the components is compassion.
Yes.
It's empathy. Empathy and compassion. Well, I say compassion and not empathy because empathy comes in 3 levels. At least that's what some of the most advanced researchers into empathy tell us. And the lowest level of empathy is called, what's that called again? Emotional contagion.
Emotional contagion. I think I've heard this somewhere, but it might be good for us to hear this actually. Why
simple
not?
Example, right?
Yeah.
You got, after the babies are born, they're in a big room. There's about 12 kids in cribs, right? One of the kids starts crying. The kid next to it, what does it do? It also starts crying. Why? Because it feels the emotion of the kid next to it, the baby, right? It feels the emotion of the newborn baby next to it, but it can't do anything to help. So it just replicates the same emotion.
Right. Okay.
That's emotional contagion. And the sad thing is, and this was in the news a few years back, that this happens with adults too. There was a story in the news a few years back where a mother smothered her baby by holding it tight against her chest and ended up killing it. Why? Because she was tired and she wanted it to stop crying. So if you want the baby to stop crying, that's the natural reaction of emotional contagion, because you're just feeling the emotion of the other person, but you don't know how to help them. So emotional contagion is also seen as a kind of empathy, but it's not a good empathy. It can have 2 results. Emotional contagion have the result that you replicate what the other person is doing. So if they become sad, you become sad, which doesn't help them. Right. If they become angry, you become angry. That doesn't help. It can be nice at a party, two people start jumping around and dancing wildly, and the other people do. And unless you're, crashing into the, glass vitrine, then that's not a problem, right?
Yes.
But emotional contagion in most cases doesn't include the ability to help. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, because the emotion is so strong within you and what your goal is just to stop your own negative emotion, now you're hurting the other people because you want to, like the mom smothering her baby, right? She wants to stop the emotion inside herself. And so she needs to stop the emotion in the baby. And if she doesn't have a helpful way of doing it, then she's got a destructive way of doing that. And compassion is the highest level of empathy, you could say. This is a simplified way of saying it, but basically it's the ability to understand the emotion of the other person, go into cognitive perspective switching, and help.
Right.
That's what I would call the definition of true compassion, which includes the ability to help.
Let's take a moment for a brief promotional break and talk about the state of our world. There are famines, floods, and fires in our backyards, a global recession affecting our economies, and war and conflict tearing down our relationships with one another. You see it in the news, feel it in your wallet, and talk about it in your social networks. It's hard to think that it doesn't affect you in your personal life and bring you down in your work. Except you want to regenerate our lands, turn our economies into circular ones, and do it in collaboration and community with others. How are you supposed to do that when it seems like everyone's working against you? You're an entrepreneur and you have a business that's going to help us solve these problems and bring these solutions? You're telling me you're going to change people's minds and raise capital for your cause and bring in triple bottom line profits? You must be an optimist, a dreamer, or completely out of touch. Who's going to buy your products or services, take you up on that offer, or help you fund your do-good business? We will. Who are we? We are the Regenerative Business Economies Network, a connected group of impact entrepreneurs, peers, colleagues, funders, allies, and supporters of regenerative enterprise building. Together, we take on the financial and personal risks of building regenerative enterprises. It's all of us together that creates the change we want to see. We must believe in each other and the work we've devoted ourselves to. If you want to be supported and also lend support to impact entrepreneurs like yourself, follow the promotional link in the podcast description or head over to seedsoftao.com and click on Join the Community. With that, let's get back to the episode.
So this definition, I think, is really, really helpful for the conversation and for your story. You're now in this place where you've taken yourself away from negotiations that you felt were not of help, and you're doing this from a compassion. You have to. You're negotiating almost in a sense your own relationship with future clients and so you're taking a higher level compassion of like, okay, I know I have a common goal with I want to see the world a better place. I know that this is not, and it's almost a negotiation with your old industry and where you're moving into now.
Yeah, just and myself.
And you're having a negotiation with yourself, right? Mm-hmm. And you're expressing compassion, but you're also seeing where and how you might be able to help these future clients. So tell me these three areas. How did you come to these three areas? I'm sure there's more than just one reason for coming to them, but yeah, help us as an entrepreneur. I think it's very helpful for that process to be talked about and worked through. But share with us how you came to these three focus areas for your work.
You mean the 3 types of clients that I'm looking at?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Can I go into one thing that before, because I feel I didn't answer the question completely, because we were talking about what negotiation and stuff like that, right? And you were actually asking me about patterns. And there's one pattern that I saw again in the training that I provided this afternoon, which is we were going to be talking about negotiations with clients. And we ended up, because it was just more important and more fundamental, about, you could almost say negotiations with yourself or negotiations between the 2 co-founders of the company. So what people underestimate, what people often don't see the importance of as much, is that founders need to be 100% aligned. Otherwise, if they've got their own values and goals and priorities aligned 100%, then they're going to be so much more powerful in negotiating outwards, right? You've got to be clear in the center.
Yes.
And because you were asking about patterns earlier, that's one pattern that I see again and again, is that founders think the most important negotiation is with an investor, for example, right? Or maybe with a client.
Investor, client. Well, here's another one for you, maybe to kind of put the perspective of a lot of people in the regenerative movement are facing forces and flows outside of their control, but they're working against the type of work that they're trying to do, right? And you understand this in regenerative farming. You have your neighbor that's spraying a bunch of pesticides. You have a whole entire industry that's almost entirely against you. So it's negotiate. They feel like their biggest negotiation is against the world at times, right? I'm not sure if it fits in this context as well.
Yeah, well, but I mean, for example, negotiating with local communities or things like that, right? And what kind of gets overlooked a lot, and this is a pattern that I've seen, what gets overlooked a lot is the negotiation between the founders to create the most solid foundation possible, so that from there outward, you are as strong and as clear as you can be with everybody else. And that's what we ended up doing this afternoon. Basically going through, in trying to reach clarity with the clients, right? We realized that the first clarity needed to be amongst the founders. And I find that so much to that people are looking outward where they haven't looked inward enough yet. Not everybody's like that. Some startups, the co-founders are completely aligned, right? So it's not always, but often. Yeah. And then, of course, investors, clients, communities, the world at large, et cetera, it goes outward from there.
I'd say it's one of the biggest reasons why we talked about businesses not making it in that gap between, startup and sustainable growth or sustainable business, is the inability to get on the same terms with their partners and their team to move things forward, right? So it does, and so I guess it also has if you're a solopreneur, it's about having the negotiation with yourself or having the negotiation with your future client before you have that client, so that you're on the right terms. And then anybody else that comes in, you've already had the conversation, you already had the negotiation with what you are willing to work towards and the goal that you're moving yourself towards. I like that.
And yeah, sorry. So I just wanted to get back on that patterns idea, right? The patterns that I've been recognizing. And then you asked about the clients that I'm working with, right? So in terms of numbers, green tech entrepreneurs have been most. Policy advocates, few so far, because I've only been at it for about a year now, right? Since I really started actually shifting and everything. And high-level policy advocates are, they usually already have negotiation trainers, and they usually they're not that easy to reach. You got to go through several layers of people to reach them. So it's taken a bit more time, but I'm hoping to work my way towards that. And I like doing that a lot because they have the negotiations where really that have great impacts on how things develop, So that's fascinating in terms of the complexity and the level of negotiations that they're having.
Right.
And Green Tech Startup Founders is fascinating in terms of how do I create a system to reach as many of them as possible. There's kind of different goal settings for me.
Right. So it's when you were thinking about that, was it more so these are clients that I can have a quick result with, these startups, the green tech startups, and then this is what I'm building towards is policy large scale policy advocates. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't see them as, how do you say, like that my final goal would be only to work with policy advocates. No, I love working with startups. 9 out of 10 startups fail. If you want to make an impact, for me, the question is, how do I, as a negotiation trainer, make the greatest possible impact for good? So with startups, there's got to be work towards the numbers. Work towards working with 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 startups per year.
Right.
Because they're not all going to make an impact. That's just the way it is. If I want to make an impact, I got to work on the numbers. With policy advocates, each and every single one of them has the potential to make a great impact because of the positions they're in. So if I give somebody who's, working on policy regulations for, let's say, making transport more sustainable in Europe. If I'm helping somebody like that, and their ability to negotiate becomes, improves, and then they have a greater impact, that impact is like the impact of 1,000 startups.
Right.
So that's how I see it. I see it as it's a different kind of game, or different kind of process or whatever, right? The other thing is the negotiations that most startups are involved in are pretty straightforward. They're negotiations with investors, with clients, like we just talked about, right?
Right.
With themselves, of course, and then with communities, the world at large, et cetera. And as they grow into Series A, Series B, and stuff like that, it becomes bigger. The number of stakeholders at the beginning of a startup process is usually not that huge. The number of stakeholders when you're, trying to negotiate for passing a new law at EU level, uncountable. It's immense, Not just the lawmakers themselves, right? The other NGOs. There's the industrial influencers, right? Maybe influencers isn't the industry lobbyists and the industry bosses themselves. And then, you've got so many countries, multiply that times lawmakers, policy advocates, NGOs, influencers, lobbyists, blah, blah, blah. And then you get a lot of stakeholders there. Right. So it's a totally different kind of negotiation. And both of them are fascinating, in their own way. In terms of startups, I think it's a process that goes quicker. A negotiation with an investor might last a few weeks. And at EU level, a negotiation about some laws, that'll last a couple of years, right? So So it's a very different kind of process.
When I see, well, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that, the regenerative entrepreneurs, right? They form a kind of special niche. I often say, when I say green tech, what I really should be saying is impact startups. Okay. So it's broader than just green technologies. Okay. I'm not focused on technology alone. So let's say impact startups, and then within that, or as a kind of docking onto that or related to it, you've got the regenerative entrepreneurs, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They often don't declare themselves as startups as such. They're not going for massive growth and scalability very often. But they're trying to create a thriving business, right?
Right. And they're doing it a lot of times in community, and doing it in in different routes than you would say, like the current searching for funding, getting. I think we should see more of this with the regenerative movement and regenerative entrepreneurs, getting greater access to capital. So that there is more scale. But you're right, like there's a really, really smaller niche. And what I'm noticing is the pattern that I've seen with the regenerative entrepreneurs is their negotiations a lot of times have to do with maybe less. There's still that, and I want to see more of it. Negotiations with investors, with larger clients, but also they're negotiating with the communities, and they're trying to be moving closer to understanding how to affect the bioregion that they impact, and moving forward that way. So I'm curious just on, and we're kind of coming to a head with the podcast of timing wise, but there's so much that we can unpack here, and so maybe we can have a part 2 of this, and we will. We're gonna do a more educational piece of helping us work through these negotiation points for regenerative entrepreneurs. But from your work and your journey that you're on right now, because you're in the thick of it, and that's what I really like about this story right now is you're living a startup story for this transition that you're taking away from the old career path into this new one. What would you say for these entrepreneurs that are listening? Some of them may not even have taken that path, but they're curious to move away from something that they feel is not serving themselves and serving the world and not creating the impact that they want. Some of these entrepreneurs are in the thick of it right now, right? Building and growing their business. What would you say from this journey that you've taken? You hope on other entrepreneurs in the regenerative realm and impact business take away from this experience that your transitioning experience.
Okay, so it depends on what life situation they find themselves in, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You've got kids, and I know that a lot of people feel that having kids is obviously, right, it's a great responsibility, but also they have a lot of financial obligations where they feel that, okay, I'm stuck with my job because I got all these financial obligations, right?
Right.
And so I think one of the first things everybody has to understand is that this is not an easy route. You know yourself that probably, if you want to start something new, and if you want to transition, there's a phase of transition that's going to hit you financially. That's just the way it is. For most people. Some people, they snap their fingers and go from A to B and everything's different. And oh my God, now I was this and now I'm that and everything's cool, right? My experience was that for about a year, I found it quite difficult to see myself even as a trainer because I felt I was so much a learner. And I think maybe that's also something that's important, is to welcome the learner mind into your life,
Yeah, I like that. I love that.
Yeah. And see, for me, of course, I have to think about what's it going to cost to send my kid to college, right? Financial obligations again. And then I thought, well, what's she going to learn there? And what are the things she's going to need 5 years down the road? What are the things that are going to be most valuable to make sure that, for example, we take all these pockets of resilience that are developing all over the world, especially in the regenerative farming and regenerative communities area, and to allow them to thrive, to multiply, and to pop up in more and more places. And if you want to be part of such a resilient community, what are the things that are really valuable for living in a resilient community rather than in a whatever multi-million inhabitant city that's going through a huge upheaval and you don't really know the outcome?
Yeah. Which is a lot of us, right?
Yeah, which is, I'm living in Berlin, right? That's 3.5 million people. Lots of my friends are living in Tokyo. That's, well, if you include the, how do you say, the greater metropolitan area, that's 36 million people. That is huge. It's not sustainable. It certainly isn't circular. It's not regenerative. And it won't be resilient against the shockwaves that are coming. So if you take that seriously, right? If you take what the IPCC report said seriously, if you take what Guterres in the UN is saying, if you take what the reinsurers are saying, right? If you take all that seriously and you appreciate the nature of these shockwaves and you appreciate that where you want to be in 5 years at the latest is as a functioning and well, what do you call that? Supportive role within a thriving, resilient community.
Right.
If you take that seriously, then, let's say even if your kids were whatever, 16, 17, or they're going to go off to university in a few years, or even if they're 12, or they're going to go off to university in 6, 7, 8 years, how useful is it for them to, I don't know, study law? It's just a question. Right?
Yeah.
It might be really cool to go into international law and join Ecocide International, right? Yeah, sure. I don't know. This is total off the wall, without pre-planning kind of. I don't know. I just had these, probably a lot of them also subconscious thought processes, trying to reorganize my priorities, and I think that's one of the parts of the process. So. Right. reorganizing your priorities about, okay, what is actually the best thing I can do for my children too? Is it to financially have the security that right now I've already got the money to send them to college in 5 years? Or is it that I understand what kinds of resilient communities are popping up as pockets all over the world and help them thrive, and then to make sure that when my child is at a college age, she can, join a resilient community that will not be hit hard by the shockwaves that are coming.
Mm-hmm.
And
mm-hmm.
where there is also a form of education that helps her build a lot of really, really valuable skills and gives her lots of really, really valuable insights. And whether that's a university or not remains to be seen,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a yes and scenario, right? Where if school is great, education is great. We want our children to get the best education they possibly can. But what is that? Is that education? What's that? What cost is that education at? And I like that perspective of kind of seeing, looking at I like the Stephen Covey quote in his book of think of the end in mind, right? Mm-hmm. Or start with the end in mind of one of his habits. And that's kind of what you're saying, is what is this perspective that we're looking at in the future? Is it really for my child to get an education, have a career, and maybe end up in the same place that I'm in this dilemma of realizing and trying to understand what my best impact is? Or is it for me to take the best to take the transition to make an understanding of what my impact can possibly be, so that my child, when it comes to their turn, already understands the impact that they want to make and can learn from there, right? Yeah. So I think there's the yes and part to it, and I took that lesson from your story. I also took the empathic understanding, right? Of like, when you're doing that lookout and you're seeing maybe in the future of what's coming and what's currently on the plate is like, well, I have to really truly have that higher level compassion for my child, the higher level compassion for the people around me and what my work is actually doing, and make that tough negotiation with yourself to do what really ultimately is best for you and everybody else around you, mm-hmm. right? So I've taken those lessons. There was the one before that too. I wanted to mention, but I my mind is not wrapping around it. What was the first takeaway that we mentioned before?
I don't know. From Nelson Mandela? No.
Just right. Nelson Mandela's takeaway was really great too, and I think that's the compassion side. Just right when we got into this conversation of like what you
priorities, maybe
the entrepreneur to take away from this.
Yeah, well, really analyzing what are your most, your top level priorities. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, when maybe, right, a lot of people feel that certain priorities are fixed. For example, financial stability, right? Mm-hmm. And it's basically that same situation, right? With you're driving your car towards the cliff and you're going 200 miles an hour, and if you tear around the steering wheel and you go off into the fields, you're going to break an axle, right? So it doesn't come for free. There's a cost to making transitions. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are you willing to pay that cost?
And having the tough conversation to do that.
analyze your personal priorities, go into that, self-negotiation mode, figure out what is more important to you. And then if it requires some level of sacrifice, whatever that sacrifice is, right? I see a lot of people making huge sacrifices, right? I see people, for example, some policy advocates who travel around the world, don't get to see their families or things like that. So, it doesn't work if you think your world should be shiny, happy people, glitter, and it's about living a happy, fun life. If you're willing to say, well, actually, to me, living a meaningful life has a higher priority and is more valuable than living a happy, fun, glittery, shiny, happy whatever life, right? You got two happies in there.
The one with the Facebook and Instagram filters, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? So, it depends on your personal priorities. And I think one of the things that becoming resilient requires is also embracing sacrifice and understanding that we get that sense of sacrifice when we say, like, there's certain things I can't do, or certain things I won't be able to enjoy, or certain things that are not going to be available to me as products or something like that. But that's going to happen anyway, right? So you might as well, first of all, get ready for that now. And the other thing is, what happens when I'm going to just shoot one out here that nobody's going to believe because it's so improbable and unthinkable, right? But what happens if suddenly there's no more Netflix and you have to sit down and talk to each other, And then suddenly you discover, wow, conversations can be amazing. Oh my goodness, what was I doing watching Netflix all this time? So not every sacrifice, at the end of the day, not everything that feels like a sacrifice in the moment is actually a sacrifice. Sometimes it's actually transitioning towards, from the worm to what do you call that? The cocoon to the butterfly, right?
Right. There's the transformation, and it doesn't look the way you want to in the moment that you are realizing that transformation. Then it's been my mind is really expansive right now, and I'm trying to rein myself in, and I want to have a longer conversation, especially around the negotiation parts of learning to express this type of compassion, build these types of relationships, and negotiate through these really, really hard challenges that many of us are working through in our businesses and in the communities that we're involved in. But then, how can we're going to have more of these conversations, you and I together, and bringing it to our audience. But how can we continue to follow what you're doing right now and engage ourselves with your work? And how can we reach out if we need a good negotiator for our business or the cause that we're working on?
Easiest is either on LinkedIn. You could find me as Ben Kimura-Gross. Kimura is my wife's last name. That's Japanese, spelled Kimura -Gross, which is German, Gross. And the other way you can reach me is just via email. Just drop me a line. It's ben@negotiating-with-goliath.com. That's a pretty long email address, but I think you could probably pop it in the notes or something like that, right?
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes. We'll definitely get your LinkedIn there. And I love how active you're on LinkedIn. You engage yourself in a lot of great conversation there as well. So if you are on LinkedIn, engage with Ben, have a conversation with Ben. Thanks again for taking the time to have this conversation with me. We are going to do a masterclass here in the future, right? We're gonna be working towards that together. So stay tuned for that, and those that are listening, keep on growing your mind, keep on growing your heart. Of course, keep on growing the garden, but most importantly, keep on growing your regenerative business and livelihood. Bye for now, everybody.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. It really is a blessing and a pleasure to bring each episode to you. So what'd you think? If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review or follow us on the podcast platform of your choice. Each review really does help us to further the reach of this podcast and move our mission forward to build regenerative economies in every bioregion. If you have a suggestion or feedback for us, please let us know in the open and free Regenerative Business Economies Network, known as RegenBen, which is linked in the description and in the show notes of this episode. RegenBen also has an awesome community request form that allows you to suggest guests, register to be a guest on the podcast, and share your own regenerative entrepreneur startup story, or any other suggestion you may have for the community. Without your feedback and requests, this podcast and community wouldn't be what it is, so please let us know. Now, this may be bye for now, but remember, it doesn't end here. It has only just begun. The regenerative economies of the future start now with you.